There is a word in this story that nobody ever heard. A 9-year-old boy walked 6 miles along a state highway in 28-degree air, in the dark, and when he finally got the chance to say the thing he had walked all that way to say, he got 4 words into it before a door opened. "And Daddy, when you see it, don't." And then a handle turned, and the sentence ended there, and it stayed ended for 11 days. My name is Nathan, and I have been telling stories on this channel long enough to know that most of them turn on something loud. This one turns on something missing. A father spent almost 2 weeks building a case around his best guess at that unfinished word, and here is what I find so worth your time. His guess was wrong, and being wrong about it saved him anyway, because he guessed in the direction of caution instead of the direction of comfort. I want you to hold on to the missing word while you listen. You will be tempted to fill it in early. Almost everybody does, and almost everybody fills it in with something dramatic. And the real ending of that sentence is so small and so ordinary that when you finally hear it, it will hurt more than the version you invented. Stay with the temperatures. That is where he wins. The call came in at 11:40 at night, which was not unusual, because the calls always came at night. Raymond Keating was already awake when his phone lit up on the arm of the couch. He had been awake in the way that a man is awake when he has not really gone to bed on purpose in about 2 years. Television on with the sound off, work boots still on, a plate on the floor beside him with the crusts of a sandwich he had made standing up at the counter. The phone said Wexham Flats Ice, and he answered it on the second ring, because when the ice plant called at 11:40 at night, it meant a compressor was down, and when a compressor was down at an ice plant, every hour cost the owner about $600 in product he could not make and could not sell. How bad, Ray said. Not a question. He was already looking for his keys. "Number 2's short cycling," said the voice on the other end. "It runs about 90 seconds and kicks. Low pressure, I think. Low's going to lose the whole night if we don't get her going." 20 minutes, Ray said, and hung up, and did not say goodbye, because in his trade, nobody said goodbye. They said a number of minutes. Keating Refrigeration was 1 truck and 1 man. It had been 2 trucks and 3 men before. Ray had a white Ford with a service body, 140,000 miles on it, and a shelf inside the box where he kept the things nobody else in Islay County kept in stock: contactors, expansion valves, gaskets in 6 profiles, a spool of 18-gauge thermostat wire, and a plastic tub of little gray controllers with a 2-line display, which was the thing that would eventually decide this entire story, though nobody knew that yet, least of all Ray. He drove out to the plant with the heater on his feet and the window cracked an inch, because that was how he stayed awake. The county rolled past him in the dark, flat and stubbled, the kind of country where the horizon is a line of grain bins and 1 water tower with the town's name on it in letters that had been repainted twice since the letters actually described anything. He knew this county the way a plumber knows a house. Not the pretty parts, the back parts. Ray Keating had keys, or codes, or a knowledge of which back door was never locked, for something like 40 buildings in Islay County. The grocery on Delaney Street. The VFW, the school kitchen, the funeral home, which had 2 coolers, and a third one nobody talked about. The church hall that did a fish fry every Friday in Lent and blew a condenser fan motor every single February like it was on a calendar. The bait shop. The ice rink out at the fairgrounds, which was not really a rink, so much as a slab and a chiller and a lot of hope. The little creamery cold storage building on the east edge of town that used to belong to the Islay family and now belonged to Bo Tillotson, along with the ice plant, along with about half of what was left of Wexham Flats. Ray had put his hands inside all of it. He was, in the specific way of men who fix machines that other people depend on and never think about, one of the most important people in that county, and one of the least regarded. He got the compressor going at 1:10 in the morning. It was a stuck low-pressure switch, a $14 part, and he had one on the truck. He wrote the ticket out on the hood by the light of his phone, and then, because he could not help himself, he plugged his laptop into the panel and pulled the log. That was Ray's thing. Everybody who knew him knew it, and most of them found it a little funny. Every walk-in cooler, every freezer, every cold room, every ice plant and chiller Ray Keating had touched in the last 9 years had one of those little gray controllers in it. He installed them free. He had a case of them, and he gave them away like a dentist gives away toothbrushes. And the reason was not generosity. or not only. The controllers logged. Every 5 minutes, for as long as they had power, they wrote down 4 things: the box temperature, the ambient temperature outside the box, whether the door was open or closed, and whether the machine was running, resting, or in a defrost cycle. They held about 14 months of that before they started writing over the beginning. Ray gave them away because when a restaurant owner called him at midnight screaming that the freezer had failed and cost him $4,000 in beef, Ray could plug in a cable and show him, in a column of numbers, that the freezer had been fine until 9:14 p.m., when someone propped the door open with a milk crate for 51 minutes. That is all a temperature log is. It is a machine that writes down what happened, without an opinion, without a stake, and without being asked. Ray Keating had spent 9 years quietly wiring Islay County with a few hundred of them, and he had done it entirely for the small satisfaction of never having to argue with anybody again. He was closing the laptop when his phone rang the second time that night. The screen said a number he did not know, with a state prefix, and Ray answered it standing in the dark outside the ice plant, with the compressor humming behind him like something finally at peace. "Is this Raymond Keating?" "Yeah." "Sir, this is Trooper Leonard Islay with the State Patrol. Are you the father of a Dylan Keating, 9 years old?" There is a specific thing that happens in a man's chest at that sentence. Ray would say later that he heard the rest of it through water. Dylan was on the shoulder of State Route 9, walking north, about 4 miles past the Wexham Flats exit. He was wearing pajama pants, a winter coat over the pajama top, and boots on the wrong feet. It was 28 degrees. A truck driver had called it in because his headlights caught a reflective strip on a child's coat at 3:15 in the morning on a road where the nearest anything was 2 miles in either direction. "He's all right," Islay said, and then, carefully, "He's physically all right. He's on his way to Islay County Medical. Sir, I need you to understand, he won't talk to me. He hasn't said one word since I put him in the car." "Where was he going?" Ray said. There was a pause on the line, and Ray heard the trooper decide to be honest with him. "North," Islay said. "Mr. Keating, your address is north." The distance from the house on Sycamore Cut, where Dylan lived with his mother, to the little brick place on the north side of town, where Ray lived alone, is 5 9/10 miles by the state route. It is closer to 7 if you follow the roads a child would know. There is no sidewalk for 4 of those miles. There is a bridge over the Wexham, with a guardrail 11 inches from the traffic lane. A 9-year-old boy had gotten out of a warm bed and walked it, at night, in the cold, past 19 houses with porch lights on, and had not knocked on a single one of them. Ray got in the truck. He did not remember the drive. The emergency department at Islay County Medical has 8 bays and a curtain track that has been broken in the same place since 2019, and at 4 in the morning it smells like coffee and hand sanitizer and, faintly, like the machine shop it shares a wall with. The charge nurse that night was a man named Herbert Goodwin, 61 years old, gray ponytail, forearms like a man who had spent 30 years lifting people who could not lift themselves. He met Ray at the double doors and put a hand flat on his chest, not hard, just there. "Before you go in," Goodwin said, "core temps 96.8. That's low, but it's not dangerous. 2 toes on the left foot got a little too cold, and they're pinking up fine. He's got a scrape on his palm, that's all. Physically, he's a healthy kid who took a long walk. You hear me? That's all. Okay, now the other part." Goodwin did not move his hand. "He's not talking. Not to me, not to the doc, not to the trooper. He's not crying either. And I want you to know, that's the part I don't like. Kids who are scared of the dark, cry. Kids who are scared of a person go quiet and watch the door." Dylan was in Bay 4, sitting up, a warmed blanket around his shoulders. A pulse oximeter clipped to a finger he was studying like it was interesting. His hair was flat on one side from the pillow. There was a red line across the bridge of his nose from the coat's zipper pull. He looked up when his father came in, and his whole face changed. It came apart and then reassembled itself into something older, and he did not say anything at all. He put both arms out. Ray sat on the edge of the bed and got hold of him and felt how thin the kid's back was through the blanket, and how tightly he was holding on, with both fists in the back of Ray's jacket, the way a much smaller child holds on. "You're okay," Ray said. "Hey, you're okay. You're okay." The boy nodded against his chest over and over and said nothing. Trooper Isley tried once, gently, from the foot of the bed. Nothing. The doctor tried. Nothing. Goodwin came in with a warm apple juice and said, "You want to tell me the best thing you saw out there tonight?" Which was, Ray thought, a beautiful question. And Dylan looked at him with real gratitude and shook his head. At 6:15 in the morning, Theodora Merriweather arrived. She came in fast, coat over pajamas, hair still flat from the pillow, saying his name from the hallway. "Dylan, Dylan, oh my God, Dylan." And behind her, unhurried, in a pressed canvas jacket with a small embroidered patch on the chest, came Clifford Thorncroft. Ray watched his son. Dylan did not move when his mother came in. He did not put his arms out. He let her hold him the way you let a coat be put on you. And when Clifford Thorncroft stepped up to the end of the bed and said, in a voice pitched exactly right for a room with other adults in it, "Hey buddy, you had us worried sick," the boy turned his head and looked at the wall. Not down, not away. At the wall deliberately, the way you look at a wall when you have decided to look at nothing. Thorncroft's face did something for about a quarter of a second and then went back to being concerned. "He's exhausted," Thea said to the room. "He sleepwalks. He's done it before." "He's never done it before," Ray said. "Ray. He's never done it before, Thea. Not once in 9 years. This isn't the place." He walked 6 miles. Herbert Goodwin, who had 30 years of standing in rooms exactly like this one, said, "Folks, I need vitals and I need the room. 2 minutes. Everybody out to the hall, please. And I mean everybody. And I mean now." And he said it with such flat bureaucratic force that Thea and Thorncroft went, and Ray, who had started to go, felt a hand close around 3 fingers of his own. Goodwin looked at the hand. Then he looked at Ray. Then he walked out and pulled the curtain most of the way closed behind him, and stood in front of it with his back to the bay, writing on a clipboard, blocking it with his body. Dylan sat up. He was fast about it. He got his mouth right next to his father's ear, and his breath was hot and unsteady, and he pushed something into Ray's palm and closed Ray's fingers over it with both hands, hard, the way you make someone hold a thing so they cannot drop it. It was small. It was warm from being held. There was a scrap of cardboard around it, torn off a cereal box, printed side in. "Don't look at it here," Dylan whispered. "Look at it in the car. Don't let Mom see. Don't let him see. Buddy, look at it in the car." The boy's hands were shaking. "And Daddy, when you see it, don't." The curtain rings went across the rail. "There he is," said Clifford Thorncroft in the doorway, smiling, with Thea just behind him. "There's the man of the hour." And Dylan Keating lay back down and turned his face to the wall and did not say another word to anyone for 11 days. The parking lot of Isley County Medical is gravel on the north end, and Ray sat in his truck on the gravel with the engine off and the windows fogging, and he did not open his hand for a long time. He was afraid of it. That was the honest thing. He had spent 2 years being careful, being reasonable, being the calm one in every room, because he had been told in a great many polite ways that his temper was the reason he saw his son 4 days a month, and he had a bone-deep animal certainty that whatever was in his hand was going to end the careful part of his life. He peeled the cereal box cardboard away. It was a micro SD card, black, thumbnail-sized, the kind that goes in a camera or a phone or a game console, with a little white sticker on one side and a number written on the sticker in a child's blocky pencil, 4. Ray had a card reader in the console because he had a laptop in the truck, because his whole job lived on that laptop. He put the card in and opened the folder, and the folder had 119 video files on it, and they were named the way a trail camera names things, in a long, unhelpful string of digits. And he clicked the first one because it was the first one. It was not a trail camera clip. It was Dylan, filming himself, holding the camera at arm's length in the dark, lit by the little infrared bloom, so that his eyes came out flat and white the way animal eyes do at night. He was under a blanket. You could see the fabric of it arching over the top of the frame like a tent, and hear it move against the microphone. He was whispering. He had his mouth almost against the lens. "Dad, if you're seeing this, then I did it." A long breath. "The camera's the one from Grandpa's deer stand. I know you're not supposed to take stuff. I'm sorry." The boy looked off to the side and listened and waited about 8 seconds and then came back. "Cliff says nobody's going to believe a kid. He says that a lot. He says it like it's a joke, but it's not a joke. The whisper got faster. So I didn't tell anybody. I just put the camera places. That's better, right? Because the camera's not a kid. Then he pulled the blanket down off his shoulder and turned his upper arm to the lens. Ray Keating sat in a gravel parking lot at 7 in the morning and looked at 4 marks on his son's arm, spaced the way fingers are spaced, and everything in him went absolutely still. Not hot. Still. Later he would try to describe it, and the closest he could get was that it felt like the moment in a walk-in, when the compressor kicks off, and the fan winds down, and the room goes so quiet you can hear the frost. "It's not that bad," his son whispered to him, on a recording, from 3 days earlier. "It's just when I don't do it right the first time." Then Dylan's head turned sharply towards something out of frame, and he said, very quickly, "I'll do more later. Dad, when you get this, don't." The file ended. 9 seconds of black. The next file was a driveway at night. Ray sat there. His hand was on the door handle, and it stayed on the door handle. He could be back inside the building in 90 seconds. Clifford Thorncroft was 40 steps away, standing in a hospital corridor holding a paper cup of coffee, and Ray Keating was a man who had put a compressor motor on his shoulder and carried it up a fire escape. And there is a version of this story that ends there, in that corridor, with Ray in handcuffs and the card in an evidence bag in the property room of the Islay County Sheriff's Office, where a deputy named Quillen Purnell, who was also, on Tuesday nights, the assistant chief of the Wexham Flats Volunteer Fire Department, signs things in and out. 2 things stopped him. The first was the 4 words his son had not finished, twice now, on a recording and in a hospital bay. Don't. Don't what? His son had thought about the ending of that sentence hard enough to try to say it twice. The second was that Ray Keating had already lost this exact fight once, in a courtroom, in front of a judge, and he knew precisely what it looked like when a calm man in a pressed canvas jacket explained that poor Ray was under a lot of strain. He took his hand off the door. He put the card in the little coin pocket of his jeans, and then he took it back out and put it in the barrel of a spare thermometer sleeve in the door pocket, because the coin pocket was the first place anyone would look, and the thermometer sleeve was the last, and he drove to his shop, and he made 2 copies, and then he did the single most important thing he did in this entire story, which was nothing. For 6 hours, he fixed a case fan on a soda cooler at the Sunoco, and he thought, to understand why, you have to know what the last 3 years had cost him, and you have to start with the part that everybody in Wexham Flats already knew. Thea Merriweather had been the bookkeeper at the county's biggest insurance agency for 11 years, and she was good at it, and she was bored in a way that Ray never once noticed. He worked nights. That was the arithmetic of their marriage, laid out plainly. A man whose phone rings at 11:40 is a man who is not there at 11:40. Ray had told himself for a decade that the work was the love, that going out at 1 in the morning so Bo Tillotson didn't lose 40,000 pounds of ice was a way of taking care of his family. And it was. And it also meant that when his wife started coming home at 9 on Thursdays with her hair down and a story about the county safety committee, he was under a condenser at the Kroger, and he believed her. Clifford Thorncroft was the chief of the Wexham Flats Volunteer Fire Department. He had been for 11 years. He was also, and this is the part that matters, the man the county contracted with to inspect and certify fire alarm and sprinkler systems in commercial buildings. Both of those things at once. He turned out on the fire calls in the middle of the night in a truck with a light bar, and he also signed the annual inspection tags that let a grocery store, a nursing home, a church hall, a school gym legally open its doors. In Islay County, Clifford Thorncroft was more than respected. He was the reason the county still had a fire department, and everyone said so, and he had built a whole life on the specific social truth that a volunteer is beyond suspicion, because what could a volunteer possibly want? The affair lasted 14 months before Ray knew about it, and he found out the stupidest possible way, an itemized phone bill, which is a kind of log, which should have taught him something earlier than it did. He did not do anything dramatic. He asked her. She admitted it in about 4 seconds, with a relief that hurt worse than a denial would have, and then she said the sentence that Ray carried around for the next 3 years like a stone in his boot. Cliff actually shows up. Ray moved out in February. He was reasonable in the divorce, because his attorney, a tired good man named Ralph Winslow, told him that being reasonable was worth more than being right. He agreed to the house. He agreed to the schedule. He agreed to joint custody with Thea as the residential parent, because Dylan's school was on that side of town, and because Ray worked nights, and because it was true. He did not fight, is the point. He behaved exactly the way you are supposed to behave. And then, 10 months later, in the December after the divorce was final, a complaint was filed with the county about the residence at 1140 North Bluff, which is where Ray lived, regarding the storage of anhydrous ammonia in a residential structure occupied part-time by a minor child. Ray did not store ammonia at his house. He had never stored ammonia at his house. What he had was a service cylinder rack in the detached garage. Empty cylinders, awaiting exchange, which is legal and ordinary and is how the entire refrigeration trade in America works. The inspection was performed on a Thursday morning by the county's fire alarm and safety inspector. The report ran 2 pages. It noted the cylinders. It noted that the residence's smoke detectors were not verified as functional at time of inspection, which was true, in the sense that nobody had verified them, in the sense that the inspector had not pressed the buttons. It noted combustible storage, which meant the cardboard boxes his parts came in. It concluded that the structure presented conditions inconsistent with the safe overnight accommodation of a minor, and it was signed, in a careful hand, C.R. Thorncroft, County Fire Inspector, and it had a county seal on it. Ralph Winslow fought it. He was actually very good. He got a licensed HVAC engineer to write a letter. He got the cylinder manufacturer's safety data sheet entered. He explained to the court that the inspector who wrote the report was, at the time he wrote it, engaged in a romantic relationship with the petitioner and living in the petitioner's home. And the judge, a decent, overloaded, 68-year-old man named Fitzhugh, who heard 40 of these a week, said the thing that judges say, which is that he was not going to weigh the personal circumstances of a county official over a signed inspection report, and that Mr. Keating was welcome to remediate the conditions and file a motion to modify. Overnight parenting time was suspended pending remediation. 4 supervised days a month, at Thea's house, at the kitchen table, with the television on. Ray remediated it in 9 days. He rented a locker at a commercial yard 11 miles away and moved the empty cylinders into it and photographed everything and paid for a licensed inspection out of his own pocket. The county's fire inspector did not come back out to recertify the residence. He was, according to the office that scheduled such things, very busy, and he was. And the reinspection sat on a list for 4 months, and then it sat on a list for 7, and Ralph Winslow filed the motion anyway, and the motion needed the reinspection, and the reinspection needed the inspector, and the inspector was Clifford Thorncroft. That is how you take a man's son, not with a fist, with a form and a seal and a calendar. And then, the following October, the creamery burned. The old Isley Creamery on the east edge of Wexham Flats had not made anything in 20 years. Bo Tillotson had bought the shell of it for almost nothing and turned it into leased cold storage. 3 big walk-in rooms and a blast freezer, rented by the pallet to hunters, to 2 restaurants, to a man who sold frozen pork wholesale, and to the county's meals program. There was 1 apartment in the building, over the old office, and there was 1 man living in it, Sonny Mannering, 58, who had worked at the creamery when it was a creamery, who had stayed on as a kind of nightman because Bo liked him, and because a building full of frozen inventory is better with a person in it, and who paid $180 a month in rent that Bo had not raised in a decade. Ray had serviced that building for 9 years. He had installed all 4 of the little gray controllers in it. He knew Sonny Mannering well enough to have eaten a sandwich standing up with him about 100 times, at 1 in the morning, in the yellow light of an open cold room door. The fire started sometime after 2:30 in the morning on the 14th of October. The building had a wet sprinkler system, installed in 1998, inspected annually. Sonny Mannering died in the apartment over the office. The medical examiner ruled smoke inhalation. He was found 9 feet from a window. The sprinklers did not activate, not 1 head. The fire burned that building for 4 hours with a full sprinkler system in it that never put a drop of water on anything. And the investigation, conducted by the county with the assistance of the local fire authority, whose chief had been on scene from the first minutes and had personally walked the fire marshal's investigator through the structure, concluded that the point of origin was the machinery space at the northeast corner of the ground floor, and that the most probable cause was an electrical fault in the compressor rack. The compressor rack that Raymond Keating had installed and serviced and signed a ticket for 11 days earlier. Nobody charged Ray with anything. That is worth saying plainly, because it is the cruelest part. There was no arrest, no hearing, no chance to stand up anywhere and say a word in his own defense. There was a report filed with the state fire marshal's office that used the phrase, probable cause of ignition, electrical fault at refrigeration compressor rack. And there was a small item in the county paper, and there was the rest of it, which happened at gas pumps and in parking lots, and at the counter of the parts store in Ledger City. His commercial liability carrier non-renewed him in January. Without that certificate, he could not legally work in a commercial kitchen, and about 60% of his accounts were commercial kitchens. He got a new policy in March at 4 times the premium from a company in Ohio that did not know who he was. Lorene Mannering, Sonny's daughter, drove up from 2 counties away for the funeral and stood at the back of the room and did not look at him once, which was worse than being looked at. He kept working because there was nothing else to do and because the walk-ins did not care what anybody thought. And he kept pulling logs, every service call, out of 9 years of habit, into a folder on a laptop that nobody had ever asked to see. That is the man who sat in a gravel parking lot with his son's memory card in his hand. A man who had lost his wife, then his overnights, then his insurance, then his name, all to the same signature, and had not been able to prove one single piece of it. Which is why he did nothing for 6 hours. And then, at 3:40 in the afternoon, he locked the shop door, turned off his phone, and watched all 119 files. They were not what he expected. There was no confession. There was no single clip where a man says a terrible thing into a lens. What there was a boy with a deer camera and no plan, and the patience of somebody with nothing else to do. Dylan had figured out the camera's strap and its mount, and its motion trigger, and over about 7 weeks he had put it in 5 places. In the corner of the garage, on a shelf, aimed across the workbench at the side door, above the mudroom, wedged behind a basket, in the crawl space vent that looked into the back of the utility room, on the fence rail facing the driveway, and, 4 times, in his own room, held in his own hand, under a blanket. Most of the files were nothing. A cat, a door, Thea carrying groceries. 41 of them were a tree branch moving in a floodlight. But there were 12 that mattered, and it took Ray until 9 o'clock at night to understand why. Clip 038, the driveway, at night. Clifford Thorncroft and a second man unloading long cardboard tubes and 2 flat boxes from a pickup and carrying them into the garage. The second man was heavyset and moved like his knees hurt, and Ray knew him. Merle Sedgwick, Thorncroft's brother-in-law, who had a sign business in Ledger City, and, according to a filing Ray would find 8 days later, was the sole listed member of Sedgwick Fire Protection LLC, formed 4 years ago, which held 11 service contracts in Isley County. Clip 052, the garage. Thorncroft at the workbench with a shoebox open, working through a stack of small rectangular cards. Ray leaned in so close to the screen his nose almost touched it, and then he sat back, and then he said something out loud in an empty shop. They were inspection tags. Blank ones. The pre-printed hang tags that get wired to a sprinkler riser or an alarm panel with the date and the inspector's initials on them. There were dozens. Clip 061, the garage, a different night. Thorncroft on the phone, pacing, and the audio was bad but not useless. 6 words came through clean. The riser's closed, it's been closed. Then he walked out of range. Clip 077, the mudroom. Thea's voice, off camera, tight and low. You told me it was signed. And Thorncroft, closer to the lens, calm, almost kind. It is signed. Everything's signed. That's the whole point, Thea. And clip 094, which was the one Ray watched 11 times. The mudroom camera. Thorncroft comes in from the garage. Dylan is at the little bench by the door, putting his boots on. Thorncroft stops. He crouches, which is a thing that reads as warm, and he puts one hand on the back of the boy's neck, high, at the base of the skull, and he does not squeeze. You cannot see him squeeze, and the boy goes completely rigid. You went in the garage, Thorncroft says. I was getting the... You went in the garage, still crouched, still calm. Here's the thing about you. And I want you to really hear it. Because you're old enough. You're 9. Nobody believes a 9-year-old. That's not me being mean. That's just how it is. If you say something about me, they call your mom. Your mom calls me. And if it ever got past that, do you know who comes to this house? A pause. Quill comes to this house. You've met Quill. He's had dinner right there. The boy nods. Okay then, Thorncroft says, and stands up, and ruffles his hair, and says, in a completely different voice, a normal one, grab the trash on your way, bud. Ray sat in the dark of his shop with his hands flat on the bench. There it was, the ending of the sentence. Don't call the police. Because the police who come to that house are Quillen Purnell, who was in that man's fire department, who had eaten dinner in that man's kitchen, and a 9-year-old boy had done the math on that all by himself, in his bed, at night, and had walked 6 miles rather than hand this card to a man in a uniform. Ray called Ralph Winslow at 9:40 at night. Winslow came to the shop in a fleece vest over his pajamas, watched clip 094 twice, took his glasses off, rubbed his eyes for a long moment, and then said the last thing Ray expected. "This is very bad," he said. "It's him. It's on camera. Ray." Winslow turned the laptop around. "What day is that?" Ray looked. In the corner of the frame, the camera's own stamp read a date in 2019 and a time of 12 a.m. Every one of the 119 files said the same thing. The camera had come out of a dead man's deer stand with a dead battery, and when Dylan put fresh batteries in it, its internal clock had reset to the factory date, and a 9-year-old boy had not known there was a menu, and had never set it. "There is no date on any of this," Winslow said quietly. "Not one. And the first thing Thorncroft's lawyer will say, and he will have a good one, because the county's insurance will pay for it, is that a bitter ex-husband who fixes electronics for a living made these files, or coached the child, or both. And Ray, I have to tell you, that argument works. I've watched it work. Then we say the kid took them. The kid isn't speaking." Winslow let that sit. "And even if he were, he's 9, and his mother will testify he sleepwalks. And the man in the video signs county documents. You have 119 undated videos and a child who won't talk. That is not a case. That is a motive." Ray stood up. He walked to the window of his shop and looked out at his truck under the sodium light in the yard, and he was, for about 10 seconds, as close to done as he ever got. And then he looked at the truck, and he thought about the shelf in the truck box, and the plastic tub of little gray controllers. He came back to the laptop, and he opened clip 094, and he paused it 4 seconds in, and he pointed at the wall behind Clifford Thorncroft's shoulder. "Ralph," he said, "what's that?" Winslow leaned in. On the mudroom wall, past the coat hooks, there was a small rectangle with a 2-line display on it, glowing faintly, showing 4 characters and a little icon. "That's the garage fridge," Ray said. "It's a beer fridge in a converted closet. I built it for her in 2018. And I put a controller on it because I had a case of them, and that controller is on the same wall as that camera, and it has been writing down every 5 minutes for 7 years what the box temperature was, what the room temperature was, whether the door was open, and whether it was running, resting, or in defrost." He was talking fast now. "Look at the display. It says 38, and that icon on the right, that's the defrost icon. That box goes into defrost 4 times a day on a fixed clock and stays in it about 22 minutes, and during defrost, the temp climbs and the display shows exactly that." Winslow was very still. "Every clip that has that wall in it," Ray said, "has a timestamp in it, not the cameras, the machines. I can take any one of these files and match the number on that display and the state of that icon against the log, and there is exactly one 5-minute window in 14 months where the box was at 38 and in defrost, and the door had been opened 90 seconds earlier, because I can see the ambient bump. I can date these to the minute, and I don't have to ask anybody's permission, and I don't have to be believed, because I'm not the one saying it. The box is." Ralph Winslow put his glasses back on. "How many of these little things did you say you've installed in this county?" 341, Ray said. "There is a particular kind of week that a man has when he stops being a victim and becomes a bookkeeper. Ray Keating spent 11 days doing what he did for a living, driving to buildings, plugging a cable into a panel, and pulling numbers off a machine. Nobody thought a thing about it. He was the refrigeration guy. He had been walking through the back doors of Islay County for 9 years, and a man in a Carhartt with a laptop bag is the most invisible object in America. The garage fridge came first, and it was not simple, because the controller was inside Thea's house, which was a place he could not go. He solved it the way the trade solves everything. He waited for a failure, and then he was the only man who could fix it. It took 4 days. On the 5th night, the compressor in that converted closet stopped, because Ray had, on his last supervised visit 2 weekends earlier, while making his son a sandwich in that kitchen, taken 40 seconds in the mudroom and backed the temperature set point down to its coldest position, which on that box, in an unheated closet in November, is a slow, guaranteed freeze-up of the evaporator coil. He would say later that it was the only genuinely dishonest thing he did in the whole affair, and that he would do it again. Thea called him at 8 in the evening, furious and inconvenienced, because there was no one else in the county to call. Ray drove over. Clifford Thorncroft stood in the doorway of the mudroom for the entire 19 minutes, with his arms folded, watching, and Ray cleared the coil and reset the set point and, with the laptop open on the dryer, and the man who had taken his son standing 4 feet away, pulled 14 months of logs off the panel, and said, "That'll do it," and left. Then he did the rest of the county, the grocery on Delaney, the VFW, the school kitchen, the church hall, the funeral home, the bait shop, Bo Tillotson's ice plant, 2 restaurants in Ledger City, the meals program's freezer at the senior center. Every account that had a little gray controller in it, and every one of those controllers had been quietly writing down, for as long as it had power, the ambient temperature of the room around it and the state of the door. And here is what came out of it. On a wall in a refrigeration shop, in a grid Ray drew on butcher paper with a carpenter's pencil. First, the garage fridge dated the videos, every last one of them, to the 5-minute block. Clip 094 was the 18th of September at 6:35 in the evening. Clip 052, the tags on the workbench, was the 3rd of August at 10:15 at night. Clip 038, the unloading, was the 29th of July. Second, the creamery's cold rooms had kept logging during the fire. All 4 controllers were in the machinery space and the walk-in walls, and 3 of them survived, and they had been running on the building's power right up until the service panel failed. And what they had written down was a shape, the compressor rack in the northeast machinery space, the thing the state's report called the probable point of origin, had gone into scheduled defrost at 2:10 that morning. During defrost, that rack's compressors are off, not idling, off, with the contactors open and no current through the motor windings, for 28 minutes. The log showed it entered defrost at 2:10 and never came out, because at 2:53, the log simply ended. And the ambient sensor in the middle cold room, the one hanging in the room air 40 feet from the machinery space on the other side of a masonry wall, had started climbing at 2:31. The room the fire was supposed to have started in had a machine in it that was electrically dead when the fire started. And the temperature had begun rising on the far side of the building first. Ray stood in front of that butcher paper for a long time. He was not a fire investigator. He knew exactly what he had and exactly what he did not have. But he had spent 9 years reading these graphs, and there is a difference, in the shape of a curve, between a room that is heating because a fire is inside it, and a room that is heating because a fire is next door. And the northeast machinery space had the second shape. Third, and this was the one that made his hands cold. He pulled the door-open events for the buildings Clifford Thorncroft had inspected in the last 14 months, and he laid them against the fire department's own call log, which is a public record, which he requested by email like a citizen, and which arrived in 4 days. There were 9 nights where the Wexham Flats Volunteer Fire Department was toned out for a call, and Chief Thorncroft's assigned unit went en route, and on every single one of those 9 nights, a building on the other side of the county, a building with a Sedgwick Fire Protection Service contract, logged a door-open event within 20 minutes. He was not going to fires. He was going to buildings, on the clock, in a truck with a light bar, at an hour when nobody asks a fire chief what he is doing in a building. On the 11th day, 2 things happened within about 4 hours of each other, and they happened in the wrong order for Clifford Thorncroft. At 10 in the morning, a Islay County Sheriff's cruiser pulled into the yard of Keating Refrigeration, and Deputy Quillen Purnell got out with a sheet of paper, and told Ray he had a court order for the surrender of electronic media unlawfully obtained from the residence at 1140 Sycamore Cut, and that he was also serving an emergency ex parte motion suspending Ray's supervised parenting time pending a hearing on allegations of coaching and emotional abuse of a minor. Ray read the order. It was signed. It was real. It was, in its way, magnificent. A man with a stolen memory card in his hand, being lawfully asked for it, by the police, at the request of a court. "I'll need whatever the boy gave you," Purnell said. "Cards, drives, phones." "Sure," Ray said, and went into the shop, and came back out, and handed him a micro SD card in a small plastic case. It had 119 video files on it. It was the second copy. The original had been in a padded envelope in the overnight drop of Ralph Winslow's office since the night they watched clip 094, along with a notarized affidavit of custody, and the third copy had been uploaded 6 days earlier to a case file at the state fire marshal's office in the Capitol, attached to a written complaint from a licensed refrigeration contractor regarding the fire at 400 Creamery Road, October 14th. Deputy Purnell put the card in his shirt pocket, which is not where evidence goes, and drove away. And at 2:15 that same afternoon, a deputy state fire marshal named Nellie Wickstrom, who had driven 90 miles because of an emailed complaint containing a spreadsheet she could not stop looking at, walked into the shop, shook Ray's hand, looked at the butcher paper on the wall for about 90 seconds without saying anything, and said, "Mr. Keating, who else has seen this?" Nellie Wickstrom was 53 years old and had investigated 411 fires, and the first thing she did was drive out to what was left of 400 Creamery Road with Ray in the passenger seat, and walk into the burned-out utility closet on the west wall and put her flashlight on the sprinkler riser. The riser is a vertical steel pipe with a control valve on it. On an old wet system, it is usually an outside screw and yoke valve, which has a threaded stem that sticks up out of the wheel when the valve is open and sits flush when the valve is closed. It is designed that way for exactly one reason, so a person can tell, from across a room, with no tools and no expertise, whether the water is on. The stem was flush. The valve was shut. Steel does not burn. It had been shut before, during, and after. And wired to it with a twist of soft wire, scorched but perfectly legible, was a hang tag. System tested. Flow verified. Main drain test satisfactory. Dated the previous November. Initialed CRT. "You cannot flow test a system through a closed valve," Wickstrom said, to nobody. "There's no test. There's no water. There's nothing to verify. Can you prove he closed it?" "No." She stood up, and her knees cracked, and she looked at him with an expression Ray came to recognize over the following weeks as her whole personality. His lawyer will say a firefighter closed it during overhaul, which happens, and he'll be able to name 3 men who might have. I can prove that a building with a certified sprinkler system did not have a working sprinkler system. I cannot yet prove that the man who certified it knew. So we need him to do it again, Ray said. Somewhere we're watching. They did it 8 days later, and Bo Tillotson set it up, because Bo Tillotson had lost a building and a tenant and a friend, and had been carrying it around in his chest ever since. Bo called the county and requested his annual sprinkler certification for the Wexham Flats Ice Company. Early, 3 months early, with a plausible reason, which was that his product liability carrier was asking. He asked for the chief personally, because everybody did. Then Ray Keating spent a Sunday making that building's fire protection system into a museum piece. He drained the wet system down through the main drain until the gauge on the riser read 0. He closed the control valve and confirmed the stem was flush. He removed one sprinkler head from the pipe over the ice deck entirely and left the open half-inch hole in the ceiling, uncapped, in plain sight, 11 feet off the floor. He hung a 200-pound bag of salt from the pipe run so the whole line sagged 4 inches out of level. He put a fresh tag on the riser reading "out of service," system drained in red block letters, and hung it on the wheel. Then he put a controller on the riser room door. It was the same little gray box he had been giving away for 9 years. The door sensor was a magnetic reed switch, $31, and it logged, every 5 minutes and on every event, whether that door had been opened, and when, and for how long. Nellie Wickstrom photographed the installation, signed and dated the photograph, and set a second camera of her own on a shelf across the room, because she was thorough, and because she did not intend for any of this to depend on a private citizen. Clifford Thorncroft arrived on Thursday at 9:52 in the morning in the department's white pickup. He was in the building for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. He walked the ice deck with Bo, talking about the deer season and about a nephew's wrestling record. He looked at the ceiling in the packing room. He glanced at the alarm panel by the office and pressed nothing. At 10:01, he wrote out the paperwork on the hood of his truck in the cold and wired a new hang tag to the riser. Through the doorway of the riser room, leaning in, reaching around the frame with his arm, which read, "System tested, flow verified, main drain test satisfactory." Dated that day, initialed CRT. He hung it on the wheel of a closed valve, 4 inches below the red out-of-service tag, and did not take that one off. Sedgwick Fire Protection LLC invoiced the Wexham Flats Ice Company $1,440 9 days later. And the little gray box on the riser room door logged, for that entire Thursday morning, exactly one event. The door was opened at 10 o'clock and closed at 10, an interval the controller rounds to 0 minutes, because the man never went in. That was the whole case, not the videos, not the bruises, not the affair, and not the 2 years, and not the report with the county seal on it. A machine on a door that cost $31, saying, without opinion or stake, that a certified inspection had lasted less than 60 seconds and had happened from the hallway. The state charged Clifford Thorncroft 11 weeks later, and the count that ended him was not the one anybody expected. There were 19 counts of forgery of a fire safety certificate and 14 of official misconduct, and those were the ones the newspaper led with. There was a count of bribery attached to Bo Tillotson's own predecessor at the creamery, because Merle Sedgwick, once he understood that his brother-in-law's lawyer was being paid by the county and his own was being paid by himself, became an extremely cooperative man within about 6 days and brought a shoebox with him. But the count that mattered was reckless homicide, in the death of Sonny Mannering, on the theory that certifying a fire suppression system that you have shut off and know to be shut off, in a building you know a man sleeps in, is not paperwork. It is a decision about that man. There was a count of endangering the welfare of a child, and it was supported by a video clip that the defense fought for 6 weeks to exclude as undated and unauthenticated, and lost, because a refrigeration contractor sat in a witness chair for 2 hours with a spreadsheet and a photograph of a 2-line display on a mudroom wall, and explained a defrost cycle to a jury in a way that a jury could follow, and because the defense's own expert, on cross, agreed that the log could not be altered without a service key that only the installer carried. Quillen Purnell was indicted separately. The card he took out of Ray's hand in the yard never reached the property room. There is no entry for it in the log, on any day, under any case number, and a sheriff's evidence log is also a machine that writes things down, and the absence of a line in it is as loud as a line. Thea Merriweather was charged with making a false statement in a sworn affidavit, which was a misdemeanor, and she pleaded to it. Ray saw her once during all of it, in a conference room at Ralph Winslow's office, on the day her attorney walked her through the exhibits, because Winslow insisted on it, and because she had a right to see what her son had done with a deer camera. She watched clip 094 with her hand over her mouth. She watched clip 038, the driveway. She watched, last, the 9 seconds of a boy under a blanket saying it's not that bad, it's just when I don't do it right the first time. Then she sat there for a while. He never once said anything to me, she said finally. I know, Ray said. Why wouldn't he say anything to me? And Ray Keating, who had every right in the world to answer that question with a knife, looked at the mother of his son and said, because he's 9, and he did the same arithmetic you did, Thea. He asked himself who'd get believed. The custody hearing took 40 minutes. Judge Fitzhugh, who was still overloaded and still decent, read the file and vacated the residential order and looked at the 2-page inspection report from 3 years earlier that was still sitting in the record with a county seal on it, and struck it and said, on the record, in a voice that made the bailiff look up, I relied on that document. I want that noted. Dylan came home to the little brick house on North Bluff on a Friday in March, with 2 garbage bags of clothes and the deer camera, which the state had returned, and which Ray had, before he handed it back to him, set the clock on. He started talking again on the 12th day after the hospital, in a car, at a drive-thru, about French fries, mid-sentence, as if nothing had ever been wrong, which is apparently common, and which nobody had warned Ray about at all. It was almost a month before Ray asked him. They were in the truck at 11 at night on a call-out to the church hall, because the condenser fan motor had gone, because it was February, and Dylan was in the passenger seat with a flashlight he was not using, and Ray said, as easily as he could manage, "Hey, at the hospital, you said don't, and then Cliff came in. What was the rest of it?" His son looked out the windshield for a while. "Don't be mad at me," Dylan said. "Ray had to pull the truck over. He did it slowly, and he put it in park, and he sat with both hands on the wheel. For what, bud? For how long I waited." The boy's voice went small and fast, the way it does when a thing has been rehearsed 100 times in the dark. "I had it since Sunday. I had it in my socks since Sunday, and I didn't come. I kept thinking I'd do it tomorrow, and then Tuesday He stopped. He started again. "I only came because I got scared he found the camera. Not because I was brave. So don't be mad that it took me till Tuesday." The heater was going. Outside, the county was as black and flat as it always was, and somewhere out in it there were 341 small gray machines writing down the temperature of the dark, and one of them, on a door, had ended a man. "Dylan," Ray said, "look at me. You walked 6 miles. "That was easy," his son said. "The waiting was the hard part. I want to give you the inventory, because I think the inventory is the lesson. A beer fridge in a converted closet. 3 controllers in a burned cold storage building. A magnetic switch on a riser room door. A fire department's own toning log. An itemized phone bill from 3 years earlier. A property room ledger with a blank space in it where a line should have been. A deer camera with the wrong year on it, in the hands of somebody too young to know there was a menu. Not one of those things was installed to catch anybody. Every one of them was written by a machine with no opinion, no loyalty, no stake, and nothing to gain. And every one of them had been sitting there for months or years, patiently, in the dark, while a very confident man went on believing that the only records that existed were the ones he signed. That is what I keep coming back to. Clifford Thorncroft did not lose because someone was braver than him. He lost because he only ever thought about the paperwork that had a human being's name on it. He never once thought about the dumb little boxes on the wall. So here is what I would like you to actually do with this one, and it is not the usual advice. Everybody says keep a record. Fine. I am saying something narrower. You are already being written down. Your car logs, your thermostat, your building's badge reader, your bank's timestamps, your phone's location history. A dozen machines are keeping an honest, boring, unglamorous account of your life right now without being asked, and most people go their entire lives without reading a single one of them. Pick one, just one. Go read it this week, while nothing is at stake. Because the day something is at stake, the machine will not care whether you are believed. It will only be able to tell you what it already wrote down, and by then, the only question that matters is whether you knew it was awake.